This is Steven Diego, and you're now tuned in to Breaking Down the Breakdown. On today's episode, we are going to talk about abandonment issues. Hello, everyone. Welcome in to another edition of Breaking Down the Breakdown with me, Steven Diego. It is currently 2 a.m. For some reason, I thought today was Sunday. So here I am, rushing an episode because I have to upload this in 3 hours. This has to debut. So you know what, guys? I mean, hey, thankfully I'm still up. But welcome to the show. I hope everybody is doing all right. Again, I want to give a shout out to Bella for last week's episode. Thank you so much for being brave enough to get on the show and share your story. And guys, if you do have stories you want to share as well, please feel free to message me. But I wanted to talk about this, and I know I've spoken about this briefly. And even when I spoke about this before, I kind of wasn't in the same mindset that I am now. And it's a very important topic for me because I believe this actually shaped, I don't want to say my misfortunes, but this shaped my decision making and honestly my cognitive distortions, and this has played a huge role in who I was, but also who I am now. And I want to talk about abandonment issues. Listen, for those of you who know, I know I've spoken about it briefly before, but my parents essentially abandoned me. Shout out to mom and dad. I love you both. First by my dad. It's a very complicated story. I can talk about it another time. Maybe I'll bring him on the show one of these days, But at the same time, I never realized how much it affected me. My mom to a lesser extent, and I will explain that when we get to it. But this episode is dedicated to everybody who, at some point in their lives, have faced some form of abandonment. It always usually stems from your parents. And this actually carries on to friendships and even relationships. But usually people's first encounter with these things are, because of your parents or your family. And so for me, I was abandoned when I was still in the womb. My dad never claimed me. But growing up, I never understood that. And you're a kid. You're not supposed to understand these things. My mom did a great job of talking to me about it when I was younger, explaining to me why things are the way that they were. Unfortunately, obviously, I was still very young. And knowing what I know now, I never actually processed it properly. I remember when my mom told me why I was abandoned or why my dad's not around, I never felt bad for myself. I remember I was about 5 or 6 when my mom explained to me. And, I never felt abandoned at that point, right? I had a great support system. I had my grandma and my grandpa and my uncles raising me. Now, when it comes to my mom, she had to leave me with my grandparents because she had to finish school. She was very young. And even that, I never felt like I was abandoned because growing up, my grandparents were my parents. They were the ones that I called mom and dad. And so it never felt, like I was abandoned. Little did I know that subconsciously, I guess I knew this. And it started taking its form when I got closer to puberty and throughout my teenage years and into adulthood. And I never understood it. Again, back in the Philippines, therapy, at least when I was growing up, it wasn't a thing. I don't think it's a thing still right now. I think it is for some people, but I'm always on Reddit because I always try to, I don't want to say I try to help, but I try to be there for strangers because it's a very tough time out there. And honestly, experiencing what people are going through in the Philippines mentally, it's still very heartbreaking, right? People still feel like they don't have the tools to get the help that they need. And so, I wanted to bring this up because I'm one of the lucky ones to have lived my life somewhere else and eventually get the help that I deserve. Now, going back to the abandonment thing, you see, it really didn't help that, how do I explain this? When you have siblings, right? At least in the Philippines, we have this running joke of you're adopted. We have this running joke of, these parents are not really your parents. They don't want you anymore. Oh, I heard they were going to drop you off at the orphanage. Honestly, not good. Definitely not good. Growing up, this was actually in the Philippines. This was very common with siblings where they tease each other about this. And we were kids, right? And back in the day, we had no social media. There was none of that stuff, right? So nobody really knows how damaging that actually is. Not just for people themselves who, are within that quote unquote joke, but how others can actually perceive this, especially for those who were actually orphaned, right? Who were actually, growing up without parents. It's very insensitive, first of all. Second of all, again, the kind of damage that this deals to people is unspeakable of. And unfortunately for me, I was the butt of these jokes. And for them, they would tease each other about it and they would get over it the next day. But I remember being teased about it enough to the point where I started questioning things. I remember, I believe I was around maybe 8 years old, and this was a core memory for me because I did not know what depression was at that point. But I remember having a party at my place, not me, my grandparents, and members of our family were around. And growing up, I always wanted to be the center of attention. I feel like that's another sign of, how do I say this? I was just being a kid. I think, I just wanted to be the center of attention, just like any other kid out there. But there was something deeper than that. For me, the moment that I feel like I wasn't the center of attention, instead of going to my room and be like, man, this sucks, or instead of, just doing something else more extravagant just to catch people's attentions, I actually tend to do, how do I explain this? Let me just give you all an example. At this party, when I felt like nobody was paying attention to me, I took the time to hide, not because I wanted to be found, but because I didn't want to be found. And I just cried to myself. And I'll never forget this. And I remember after crying, I went straight to the shower without even taking off my clothes. I just took a bath, fully clothed. And I don't know why I did that. I don't know if it was because I wanted to feel something different. I was a kid, right? Even right now, I honestly cannot tell you why I did that. Definitely something I need to bring up to therapy next session, because this is something I still haven't spoken to spoken about to my therapist. But I remember doing all of this, and I remember getting out of the shower and getting in trouble for it. And I was confused. I will never forget that feeling. Why am I getting in trouble for doing that? I mean, obviously, you showered with your clothes on. What the fuck is wrong with you, kid? Right? But, as a child, I remember the only thing that came across my mind when I was getting yelled at was, oh, so now you pay attention to me. And I believe this event actually set off a chain reaction for me, in the sense that in order to get attention, I needed to do something super drastic that would get me in trouble, just so I can get people to talk to me. Now, mind you, I was 8 when this happened. But looking back at this event, at this moment, it really kind of shaped how I started acting out, especially in high school. If you meet anybody who met me in high school, oh my goodness, they will tell you to run. And I can't blame them at all. For the longest time, I never understood it. I've always thought that I was nice. I always thought that, I just wanted to be loved. I just wanted friends. I never understood why people never liked me. I lived in that bubble, right? And looking back, slowly unraveling things in my childhood, only then did I realize I was so fucked up in high school. I would make up stories just so I can get people to talk to me. I remember people would trust me with things, and I would end up telling other people because I wanted to make more friends. I wanted to be the source. I wanted to be like Gossip Girl, but Gossip Girl wasn't even around when I was in high school. It was just not healthy. And I remember when, the cards finally came tumbling down, I found myself alone. And it was my own doing. Yet I couldn't take responsibility for it. I still decided to blame others for that. And I would do something even worse, something even more drastic, just so I can draw attention to me again. And it was a cycle. It was a vicious cycle that I lived through. And I remember when things finally started to kind of bother me, I wanted to pinpoint why I started doing these things. And I, unfortunately, blamed the wrong thing for it. I said, oh, it's because I was being bullied. So, this is why I was acting out. Because nobody fucking loves me. Because nobody cares about me. Because people are mean. But you see, when you're a teenager, you don't sit here and think, oh, wait a minute. Those were the key words. Nobody loves me. Nobody cares about me. Because why would I even feel that way? Well, if I only knew that it was my abandonment issues that brought me these emotions, I probably wouldn't be that terrible of a person. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. So going back to abandonment issues, if you or someone right, has been through a situation in which you were abandoned, I always say get a therapist to talk about it, because they will give you the right tools. Therapists cannot fix it for you. You have to fix it yourself. They're only there so you can bounce off ideas to them. And they can tell you certain things that will allow you to explore these feelings safely and to allow you to move on safely. And I say this because there are far too many people right now that I know that have not been healed yet. And I don't think they ever will be. Because I don't think they have ever pinpointed why things are the way that they are. And why they act the way that they do. And why they think the way that they think. Sometimes this is how people deal with their trauma, is not realizing they have trauma at all. If I could turn back time, if I could time travel actually, and I could just, meet myself when I was younger, I totally would. Right? I could present myself as like a long lost cousin of the family, and I'll talk to my younger self and give myself advice. And I don't mean like a philosophical, like, oh my goodness, this and that. I would just simply tell myself, hey, everybody loves you, right? Sometimes just having someone to reassure you that they do love you, that people do love you, is enough. And funny enough, this is actually an exercise that we do in therapy. For those of you who have been in therapy, this might be familiar for y'all when your therapist tells you to write a letter to your younger self. And then you have to read it as your younger self, to yourself. And something about it is therapeutic, reassuring, something about it. For some people, it's actually what they're missing. It's actually the missing piece that allows them to fully heal. For me, it definitely was something that helped me move on. I don't want to be a pessimist and be like, yeah, but unfortunately, everything already happened. But, I'm still here. I'm still breathing, right? I still have a chance to experience love the way that everybody was meant to experience it. And I'm working towards that bit by bit every day. Unfortunately, again, I wasn't able to completely heal from my abandonment issues, that my relationship suffered from it. I think it's very interesting, and I think it's very sad that for a lot of us, a lot of our experiences, right, our negative experiences growing up, is what's undoing our present. And I think it's time to acknowledge these things. There's always a saying when people say that if it stops or if it doesn't happen, then it's not for you, right? And that, if you believe in God, that God removes people from your lives for a purpose, for a reason, and you should be grateful for it. And I believe that, but only in the opposite way. And I don't want to say only, right? I do believe it, but what people don't explore or what people don't talk about is how it can actually be seen from the other angle. Sometimes the universe or God, whichever God you believe in, removes people from your life not because they were going to hurt you, but because the universe is preventing you from hurting them any further. And think about that. Because how many issues do you have that have gone unresolved that you may be projecting onto your partners or other people right now at this very moment? And unfortunately, you will never realize it until these people leave, until the damage is done. Unless, of course, you are going to therapy and you start kind of realizing things and taking accountability for it, right? And we can talk about all these other issues, but today, we're talking about abandonment issues. My abandonment issues is actually what's to blame for my anxious attachment styles, right? Not just with friendships, but with relationships. But dating back to high school, dating back to grade school, right? It was interesting because I was very possessive of my friends, to the point where if it looked a little obsessive, it looked like I was in love with people. I wasn't. People, mistakenly thought that I was in love with this guy or that girl, and but it wasn't like that at all. I was afraid that I had found someone who I thought was alike, who I thought cared about me, who I thought would be my best friend for life. And I was afraid to lose them because somebody else better comes along, somebody else cooler, somebody else who probably got along with them better. And I would go balls to the wall, swing to the right or the left, doesn't matter. But the pendulum would swing so far just so I can make up for what I thought I had lacked in the friendship, what I thought I could eventually lack in the friendship, and what I thought they might need in the future. I'm not psychic. I don't know what that is. I can control people. I can control friendships, right? But say that to somebody growing up who was left by their parents. Say that to someone growing up who had been abandoned. And all they knew was that the very people who was meant to raise them and love them decided to give them up. You can't. And it's sad, right? But why I'm talking about this is important because, and I'm not saying it's our responsibility. Let's say we have children in the future, right? And this happens to their friends. I know it's not our children's responsibilities to be that person to save these people, right? It's not about that. But having a bit of an understanding as to why people act the way that they do, it'll allow all of us, I don't want to say to stop the bleeding because, again, we are not responsible for certain things. But it will give everyone access to the kind of support that they need if they ever seek for that kind of support. This is why, I'm so happy there's so many podcasts on mental health and relationships and honestly just general talk. This is something we never had growing up. And to be able to hear people talk about things that have happened to them, no matter how silly, no matter how dire, right? It's really, I believe at least, that, we can argue and say that it's also not a good thing or if it's too much. Certain TikTok things, you're just kind of like, what are you promoting? But, it could also be a positive thing, right? It's not easy to deal with abandonment issues at all. It's not easy to deal with any issues, right? But coming from someone who has been through it, believe me, if my whole incident with the cannabis never happened, I don't think I actually would be the person that I am now, obviously. But that means I would have lived my entire life blaming others. I would have, wasted my entire life not taking accountability for my emotions, for my actions. I would have not experienced the kind of growth that I experienced. I would not have known how great life could be. And I sure as hell wouldn't have gone to therapy to realize that a lot of my decisions that I've made in my life were governed by my abandonment issues. A lot of my intrusive thoughts came from it. A lot of why my relationships failed came from it. The next time that you talk to someone that you're close to, right, and you know their upbringing, and you know that it's kind of similar to that, I would say, obviously, don't just randomly bring that shit up. That's very triggering. But when you start to notice that they're spiraling, when you start to notice that there's a pattern with their failed relationships, when you start to notice that there's a pattern in their behavior, a little bit of reassurance won't hurt. Allowing them to see that, hey, I think those are just intrusive thoughts because you're very lovely. As much as they'll say, you're just saying that because you're my friend. That kind of thought process actually does help them. Because when they look back at it and they think about it, they'll realize, wait, I just said friend. And sometimes that's all we need. A friend. As silly as that is. Sure, it's not gonna, it's not gonna be like spearheading like abandonment issues has been fixed because of friendships. But actually, in some cases, that's all we need. Friends to tell us they care about us. Friends to let us know that friends change and they come and go, but you will always feel this kind of kinship with people, regardless if it's a new friend you've made or if it's an old friend. We tend to forget about these things because we tend to focus on the negatives of what happens when relationships end, when friendships end, right? We tend to forget that we can forge another bond with another human being out there, all the while retaining the good memories we had with people that are not in our lives anymore. And sometimes these people come back. I have so many friends that have not spoken to in like 5-10 years. And, shout out to Sherry's crew, right? Shout out to Jess, shout out to Xavier, shout out to Hillary, right? Shout out to Diane. Like, shout out to all of these people that I just saw again, right? Shout out to Julian. Like, these people that I did not see for more than a decade. And I saw them again, and it just felt like no time had passed. And it was actually crazy. It felt like home again, seeing these people, even though I know nothing about them anymore. But that's my point. It's hard to deal with abandonment issues because it tends to take us away from the present. We tend to dwell on what had happened in the past, how we were left behind, that we fail to see that we should be focusing on nurturing the friendship that we have right now, the relationships that we have at this very moment. Anyway, I just want to say thank you for listening. I hope for those of you who are experiencing the same things that I have experienced, I hope you are listening to this and realize that, hey, you're doing great. If you're listening to this, you're doing great. Because that means you are looking for answers. Because this means that you just know something ain't right. Just because you were abandoned don't mean you should be feeling like this. But this has been Breaking Down the Breakdown. This is Steven Diego. Thank you so much for listening. I will see y'all next week. Remember, if you guys want to be a guest, you can follow us on Instagram, Breaking Down the Breakdown Pod, or email me at breakingdownthebreakdown@outlook.com. But thank you so much. It is so late. I need to sleep. I got work tomorrow and I've been throwing up all day. TMI, TMI, TMI. But you know what? Gotta make monies. Good night. Love y'all. I'll see you later. Bye.